We will have Kyla Rayner from Wellington Rape Crisis. I believe Kyla is facilitating this panel. Tony Chamberlain, who is the Pou Whakahaere for Tautoko Tane, or Male Survivors of Aotearoa, and has been instrumental in the development of its national network since 2014. Maggy, Tai-Rakena, kia ora whaia, who is a registered social worker and the manager of Start Healing in Ōtautahi. And Start has worked for 35 years with our tamariki, our rangatahi and Pakeke who have experienced sexual violence. Maggie is also the tauiwi chair for Te Ohaki Ahine, National Network Ending Sexual Violence Together, or TORNEST. And Kim Eriksen Downs, an Indigenous Wellbeing Practitioner of Ngāti Tūwhare Toa, Mōkai Pātea, Ngāti Kahungunu and Ngāti Awa. Kim has 30 years experience walking alongside whānau, hapu and communities. She is a founding member of Te Hapori Ora and also sits on Te Pū Kotahitanga, the Tangata Whenua Ministerial Advisory Group. Wow. This panel will run for 1 hour. You are welcome to submit questions using Slido. And as the questions come through, we'll share them on the screen for Kyla to ask. For those of you in the room, that was more for those who are at home. For those of you in the room, if you have a question, please put your hand up and we'll support Kyla to manage those using a roving microphone. The CEs after the panel who will offer reflections are Megan Main, the CE of ACC, and Jeff Short, who is the Deputy CE of Te Puni Kōkiri. I will now pass things over to Kyla. Nā mihi, paki mai.
Kia ora talofa lava. As I said, I'm Kyla and it's my privilege to facilitate the first panel this morning on healing. I'm sitting here with my esteemed colleagues, Maggie, Tony and Kimmy. Who some of them I've only just met right in this moment. And this sometimes can reflect all of the incredible work happening up and down the country, and yet we are sometimes bereft of that time to sit, to pause, to share and to connect and learn from each other. So I thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I too will be learning from the stories that they will share with us. And I'm really pleased that we've decided to start the day with healing. I think that when we do this work and we do this work for a long time, we become very busy and then a strategy comes out and then we become even busier. But what we need to do at all times in this work is ground ourselves in the reality that people have been harmed. An intolerable amount of people have been harmed. And it is our work here together to respond to that harm appropriately and to ensure that that harm stops in Aotearoa for our future generations. So it is right that we start today with healing. It is right that we centre and ground ourselves in the experiences of the people harmed by violence in New Zealand. It is beautiful to be able to start this day also after the talk from our minister. And I thank our minister because every time I hear our minister speak, that is healing to me and the people that we represent. And every engagement we've had with her, we've felt that you've heard us, we've felt that you've taken our words, and we've felt that you have privileged and honoured the stories and experiences that we share to you from our community, from the very people that we serve. Te Toko Turo model describes the respite, recovery, rebalancing and restoration required for us all. For individuals, this looks like their personal healing, their collective healing, their customary healing practices. It asks us to think about all of the different types of support required to restore a person's mana and connection in their own systems, to enable us all to live free from the harm of family and sexual violence. And we're all in this room because we know that that is not all that it's going to take, that we need to apply that restorative and healing lens across our entire system, that there is the need for restorative actions at a policy, institutional and community levels so that we continue to address the power imbalances and the harms of colonisation and discrimination. We're all in this room because we know that healing is indeed required urgently for more of the people than we're even currently seeing. and that needs to happen at an individual level, a family level, a community level, an organisational level, and a government level, indeed a national societal level. So this morning, as our panellists share their stories about their work, we'll learn about the progress that they've made, and I know that we'll be inspired and both challenged. And I again thank our Minister for giving us that beautiful illustration. All we need to do is look out here and remember exactly why we are here, who we are here to serve, and why this change is so critical and so urgent. So thank you for joining us not only today and online, and I encourage you to submit your questions so that we can indeed make the most of these people alongside us today on this panel. Maggy. We're going to start with Maggy. And Maggy, we're hopeful that you can share a story or some stories with us talking about that growing awareness around the importance of restoration and healing when addressing sexual violence. And over the many years that you've been working with survivors, but also supporting the people that also work with survivors, what have you learnt around what really supports healing and recovery for the people that you work with?
Ngā mihi mai auha kia koutou katoa. Hopefully my mic is working. I found this a little difficult to prep for, I'd have to say, because 30 years, there's a lot to tell. So I just thought I'd tell you a bit about our service. So that's what I'll do. And if it leads to questions, so be it. So our organisation is called START. We set up 36 years ago to attend to the healing needs of kids and young people who had disclosed sexual violence, because there was no specialist place for them to go to for healing at that time. There were a few private child-focused therapists in town, but the fees that they charged meant that people couldn't afford to go there. So 3 women decided we needed to change that, and it was before my time. It was before I got there. So all these years later, START still offers specialist services for children and young people, as well as wraparound healing services for all ages, all genders, all ethnicities, from our homely premises in Ōtautahi. We also offer social work, early intervention, consultations and community education. We offer a continuum of care, which we believe is a good way to tackle this need in our community. What we've learned over time is that healing services need to be specialised, holistic, systemic, inclusive of whānau, paced, developmentally appropriate and not time limited. Tamariki rangatahi services need to be designed for them rather than fitting them in to adult services as little adults. We've also learnt that people doing this work need to be well trained, skilled, grounded, supervised, supported and be given realistic caseloads and encompassed about by a community of kaimahi. No one works full-time at our place, it's a rule, because therapeutically it's tough work. We've also learnt that the physical environment matters, and we operate out of a home. We have a great play space outside, and we have a great garden for people to wander around. It's part of the therapy. It's a luxury, I know. We are bedded into a neighbourhood as well as the local NGO social service sector, because many people need more than just what we have at START. We focus on sexual violence, but we collaborate actively to wrap around people with other services as appropriate. START also has strong and positive relationships with both police, particularly the Child Abuse Unit, but with the Adult Sexual Assault Team as well, and with Oranga Tamariki. They are the investigators and have the statutory authority that we do not. We've got our piece of the puzzle, they've got theirs, but we actively collaborate over that piece of work. Our services have long been free to users. Our premises are accessible. We highly value manaakitanga, hospitality in our waiting room. And we've got a koha box that's always being rummaged through. People give us stuff, we give it away. For some people, that's the only reason they come to healing. We don't care. Just come through our door and we'll give you what we've got. That's how it goes about. So we employ ACC accredited therapists where possible, because ACC's offer of life course healing services for victims of sexual violence is unique in the world, and it's a model with much to commend it. For example, free specialist trained counselling alongside other practical supports such as teachers' aides, rongoa, employment and study supports. Sadly, it's also a Western medical model, and the time is well nigh for a kaupapa Māori track of therapeutic response to be offered through ACC. The opportunity for survivors to do a piece of healing work and take a break, integrate the learning, then return at a later date if desired, is pivotal to effective therapy. People need to have the freedom to come and go and set their own healing pace. Episodic approaches tend to be especially useful for children who encounter different developmental stages in processing their trauma. I noticed somewhere in the beginning of the program it said healing is a process, and you don't it talked about you can't kind of move on until you're fully healed. But the truth is we spend our lives healing. It's not a place that you arrive at, it's a journey. And so you need help at various stages along that way. It needs to be a door that opens and closes periodically. What we observe as healing is a multidisciplinary team approach where survivors can be met where they're at and supported for as long as they want or need without judgment, where they are welcomed into a healing community and treated respectfully and thoughtfully, yet not as forever broken. Learning that healing is possible and that everyone has a different journey. I've observed many lives change with good support around them, and I think of the children. I think of the children who changed their lives, but I also think of the adults whose lives are changed. Starters had to eke out an existence over 3.5 decades through some dire financial times. I'm delighted to be around long enough to see some positive changes, and that we have some government, we're on the government agenda at last. And we have much to do, and we've come a long way. But it's a long way since the days when I actually had to sit down and calculate how much it would cost us to close down because of 2 external forces that meant we had absolutely no money to carry on. We are not in such a fickle place now financially, and it's great to see. Big problems with waiting lists, and that's not great for our services. We really need that to change. But I guess the flip side of that, the rose-coloured glasses in me would say, it's great that so many people are coming forward for help. So that's a positive. So sustainable funding, workforce development, long-term strategies, and a drive by society and government to eliminate sexual violence is where we must go to enable those harmed to heal. It's no quick fix and no single offer. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Maggie. Kia ora, Maggie. Thank you for sharing with us. There was so much gold in that response, so many gems to mine, so much richness, so much complexity, so much nuance. It gives you a real sense that the answer isn't one individual healing one person. That gave us a sense of the entire system and environment that's required around that worker, and actually the system response that you're also engaging with. It's an incredibly complex piece. And I think the thing that we need to also really remember and centre every time Maggie talks and other people in the room, we're talking about tamariki. We're talking about children. And we still haven't been able to create the right levels of access, support and tailored response to ensure that that response is ready and available every time a tamariki needs it. And so we will continue to hear from you. I'm wondering if there are any questions that are coming through from the room. Feel free to ask them. I want to make space for that opportunity, perhaps after every panellist speaks. And there will also be time at the end. Kia ora.
I guess we run off our feet with tending to the victims of sexual violence, and we've specialised in that area, but you point out that there's a greater need, a far greater need. It's a horrid thing to say, but basically the children who've experienced sexual violence have access to help that children who've experienced family violence often don't. And I think that's a gap in our country. I think that ACC should cover those children too. And so all children should have access to help to recover from trauma. We will change this country by doing that.
Kia ora, Maggie. Thank you for that question. Kim, I'd like to turn to you now and give you some space to share with us some of the work that you've been doing and how far you've come with enabling trauma-informed responses that make sense to you and your communities. And I wonder, you know, for those of us who work out in the community, I can imagine how hard it is out here when you are practicing from such a rich and deep place. And how is it progressing in terms of other people understanding the value of the way in which you work and privileging the way in which you work?
Use that one.
Kia ora. Tēnā rā tātou. Well, can you ask me the question again? I've forgotten it now. I think about, as our minister said, whakapapa violation is all forms of violation. There is actually no category because it has the same result. So when I think about trauma-informed responses, that's how I think about responding. So for many years, I worked in 30 years actually. I've worked in the community in many different spaces. And what I've discovered is what I started with at 5 years old, sitting and watching the pōwhiri on my marae every time, sitting there and realising that that was actually what I needed to do to work alongside of our people. Watching a pōwhiri, the engagement of the karanga, the people call. You call to the people call back. And then we go into whai kōrero and having conversations with our people rather than us coming with the approach that we actually know what it is that our people need. We're having conversations, as people have said over and over again, people's voice, people's choice. That's the only way we work at home. In Tūwharetua, I just want to acknowledge Te Hapori Ora, a group of whānau who come together just to start with a wānanga and then wanted to do more. So they were volunteers that come together and now are service providers. And so I'm very proud of the work at home in Tūwharetua. What do? We get together, we sit with our people, they tell us what they need, they tell us what they want, and we get to putting that in place. Whatever that looks like, whatever label it comes under in someone else's eyes is irrelevant to us, to be honest. We're just walking alongside of our people, doing what they need with what we have. And often that's very little. It's getting better, people, it is getting better. What isn't recognised is the Indigenous practice. I acknowledge every single iwi kai whakaruru hau in this country who I've trained alongside of, who I've trained personally myself through Te Kora Waiaroha Aotearoa. I acknowledge them because the thing is that I was talking to my friend over there, Mr. Kibblewhite, just not so long ago, and I said to him, I have to keep validating myself for being who I am when I'm asked to deliver a service of cultural value to people. I'm tired of that. I'm sick and tired of it. I have to go into organisations. They want me to come. They want my cultural knowledge to work alongside of our people. However, I have to ascribe to a system that isn't what's going to validate my cultural knowledge. It is our people that validate our cultural knowledge, not a board of people. And so I might have gone a bit off track there, but that is the work that we do every single day. Sit with our people, listen to them, just like a pōwhiri on the marae. Listen to them. They tell us what they need and we get about providing the resource. That's manaakitanga and that's mana in action. And so have I had enough to talk about, do you think? That's enough for now.
Kia ora. That was beautiful. It is our people that validate our cultural expertise and knowledge. And indeed, all of these responses ultimately are built out of the lived experience, lives, voices, and spirit of the people that we serve. And we need to privilege them and build the system around them in order to be able to respond to them in the way that we know will make sense and create well-being and sustain that well-being long-term. Are there any questions in the room here for Kim while we have this opportunity? Kia ora. Tony, welcome Tony, lovely to meet you. I'm hoping that you can talk to us about Tautoko Tane and share with us some stories or your experience that can tell us about how far you've come and maybe what that relationship has been like working with government partners and what's been successful, what's worked well for you.
Yeah. Kia ora. It's a privilege to be here today to talk a little bit about the male survivors in our community. And I guess I'd start by saying identify with much of what's already been said by my colleagues on this panel for differing reasons. But our ambition, our focus is enabling the wellbeing of male survivors across Aotearoa. And we are a relative newcomer to this, in fact. Although the movement for male survivors has been around for 32 years in New Zealand, kia ora to Ken and the people who started it, we've only been nationally organised since 2015 and only funded since 2019 when we were recognised for the first time in Budget 29 by government. And I want to talk a little bit about what's happened since then, really, because it's been a fast journey to get to where we've got to. Since that time, in only 3 years, we've grown from 5 to 11 regional services, and we now service all of New Zealand except for the Manawatu in Southland, which we're currently pursuing. We've increased our engagement with male survivors from about 600 in 2014 to over 2,000 as we sit here today. And we have a workforce now that comprises over 100 peer workers, counsellors and support staff, more than 70 EFTs from a starting position of about 5 or 6. And that workforce is increasingly reflective of our partnership with Māori, with 23% of our frontline staff Māori and 34% of our governance across the country Māori as well. Education and training has been the main focus of what we've been on about. We've had to build our own workforce to do this mahi as we go along. And our residential programs have trained more than 120 people in those 3 short years. And we've got a focus forward for new programs that we've launched now, which will continue that focus into next year as we train new people in peer support, group work and reflective practice. Our core service is peer support, and we're very proud of the fact that this year we launched a new purposeful peer support framework, which is more relevant to our local context in Aotearoa and much more reflective of our intentional partnership with Māori. It's built around a wellbeing framework that we launched last year. We can't be about enabling the wellbeing of male survivors if we're not prepared to talk about what we mean by that. That framework is a synthesis of 2 Māori models of health, 3 Western frameworks, and integrates the recent New Zealand Mental Health Foundation of 5 Steps to Wellbeing. So we think it's a pretty comprehensive group. I'd like to say that both our Purposeful Peer Support Program and our Wellbeing Framework are active frameworks. They're still in formation, and we intend to build and strengthen them over the years to come. What have we learned so far? We've reinforced our knowledge that something we knew already: peer support is the most effective engagement proposition for male survivors, who have often been seen as reluctant and late people to come forward to seek healing. But perhaps our experience over the last 3 or 4 years tells a different story. If we have a service that's simple to access and a service that they find they get their own way in, they will actually come. We have something we say in most of our literature: there is a great deal of strength gained from knowing someone who has walked where you are walking and now has a life of their own choosing. And I was listening to what you were saying about listening to what people want, walking alongside of them, not telling them what they need, and trying to find ways to help them. That is actually both the strength of what we do and actually one of the challenges we face in doing the work. We know that our federal structure is a particular strength. When we began this work, we saw the federal structure as possibly something that would be in the way of what we wanted to do, but in fact it's turned out to be one of our major benefits. We have a policy framework that overarches what happens in the country across all of our service centres, but those service centres are absolutely operationally free to respond to their local communities in the way that they need to. And that's produced some interesting variances in what we do. One example of which would be in our Nelson service, we have a huge focus on the homeless people, which sits alongside the work we do in male survivors. It's also been pivotal in developing our response to working more effectively with iwi. We have different emerging responses across the country as different organisations find different ways to work with their local iwi. In the far north, we have a totally Māori-led and Māori staff kaupapa. In the Waikato, we have a strong bicultural unit, which has a special services unit for operating with Māori, which is run by the Māori staff in that unit. We have Marae-based and Pacifica whānau-based collaborations in Tamaki Makaurau. And in the south, we have a whānau-ora connection, which has given us a co-service approach to work in that area. There's no secret about the challenges we face in the work that we do. We're in fact very challenged to resource a rapidly growing demand for our services. We've unlocked the box, the men are coming, and now we have to find a way to actually support the work we're doing. In essence, this work presents three interrelated problems. Workforce development. It's easy to appreciate there's no untapped resource of experienced peer workers sitting in New Zealand that we can access. We have to train these people ourselves. This means a considerable investment not only in the training, but in the mentoring and support that they need to do the work that they do. This is a trauma-experienced workforce. These people come from a trauma background. Every day they go into an area to risk being re-triggered by the trauma they're sitting down to help other people work through. There's a lot of support required in this. We have to make a considerable investment in the well-being of these national teams. And in that respect, I would say that training these people in self-leadership is not a nice to have. It's an essential thing to build the mana, resilience, and the courage they need to do the work every day. So this is a struggle. Working with trauma-experienced people, the value they bring to the work we do is a huge advantage, but it also presents a huge challenge for us to actually help these people cope with the work they do. I heard someone talk before about safe caseloads. This is something that's very dear to our heart. We have a safe caseload model which has been developed by our people, which simply says there's a limit to the number of trauma-affected people that a trauma-experienced person can work with at any one time. So trying to balance that with the funding we get is quite difficult. Accessibility to our services, well, in a simple sense, accessibility means we have to be present. We know that demand for our services nationwide. We need to be in Manawatu and Southland, as I know our Minister really understands. We need to be resourced to be regionally relevant. You can't service Tamaki Makaurau with 3.5 EFTs. It's simply not possible. And our funding needs to actually recognise the expansive geographies that we cover. In many cases, it will take 3 hours to spend 1 hour with one of our people in the regional field. You can't do that with a centre that's staffed with 1.5 EFTs and is trying to reach the whole geography of Taranaki, the whole geography of Otago and Southland, the whole geography of the Waikato, and I could go on. To be accessible, we need to be present, and our two main access challenges, or a couple of them are, we continue to struggle to make peer support work an acceptable way of working with other professional groups and agencies. We desperately need other professions and government agencies to respect the potential of what we can offer and be more prepared to work alongside us in a co-healing capacity. We need approved entry and formal engagement pathways. We work with prisoners and probationers all the time, but with no national protocol or arrangement, and we do this work with no extra funding. We provide much remote support for ACC client engagement, and we work sporadically with police integrated service units, but we don't have any national protocols and we're not funded to do this work. To be accessible, we need to be present. The people of Aotearoa need to be aware of our mahi. Although we're aware of the incidents of male victimisation, 1 in 6 males under the age of 16, more than 60% of our male prisoners have been sexually abused, more than 60% of males under psychiatric care have sexual violence in their history. Most males under the age of 14 who suicide have a history of sexual violence. And borrowing from our neighbours across the fence, 1 in 3 victims of domestic violence are males. Male survivors still struggle to be recognised as victims within the New Zealand context. We were not originally in the original draft of Aorerekura. I'm pleased to say we're there now. There are still sector views that actively position males and perpetrators and women as victims, and I think this is particularly unhelpful. We need to get the gender issue out of this. Sexual violence is sexual violence, no matter who it's committed against, and we need to work collaboratively to make this work better for everybody. And I think personally we need a national awareness campaign that none of us can afford to mount. Aspirations, probably a few of them, but rather than talk too much more, I'm around for the day if you want to talk to me. Just simply to say, much more collaboration is required in the sector to make it work. We can't deal with all of the services required for male survivors. We're getting better at working with our Māori friends. We're getting better at working with Pacifica. We really have no idea how to properly engage with the other ethnic communities that have significant male survivor problems within them. We need to collaborate with other people to do that. And I'll continue to say, as I did some years ago, we need a brand new commissioning model, a model that really clearly allows the voices of the victims, the services, to coincide with the voices of the funders to produce models for service that are relevant to the communities that we're trying to engage with. And we do not need models that force people down particular channels which are created by agencies and government, either intentionally or unintentionally, that force people into particular slots for healing solutions. I think that's enough for now.
Kia ora. Thank you, Tony. And like Tony was saying, there's so much commonality between our 3 panellists and the different cohorts and populations that they seek to serve. And these 3 are only 3 of the many different communities and organisations working out here, trying to create the appropriate services and responses to work with all of our different identities, cultures, experiences. And exciting news, we've got some questions here through on the screen, so I'm going to take this opportunity to ask some of these questions that people have provided either online or in the room. And Maggy, I've got one for you here. Someone is asking, the ACC system is great to provide funding for every victim, but how do you provide the service on what they pay? It costs us about double what ACC pays.
It is I guess our service has been around for a long time, and so we've worked out a way to fund the overall offer that we have. We have contracts with MSD and with Oranga Tamariki and with ACC. And between those mixtures of different ways in which we have our income, we're able to cover the needs. But yes, ACC's fees are insufficient. If you're providing a holistic wraparound service for children in particular is expensive. If you're doing that where you're working with families for adults, it's more expensive than a model that's premised on one person in front of you. And oftentimes, you know, private practitioners may be working in their own homes and they're not got a lot of overhead. So to do a decent job of the offer of healing through ACC, the fees, you know, they're not terrible, but they're not sufficient. And I think that it's really likely to be worse in bigger cities like Auckland, where they're paying bigger rents and there's other overheads. So it's not equal up and down the country. And I think that it would be reasonable to think we could price our services up. I did that exercise at one time and ACC's income did not cover the costs. I support that view.
Thank you, Maggy. Kim, I have a question for you here from Slido. Mana whenua practices are essential for healing, but what are your thoughts around safety? Does healing alone achieve safety when the courts condone violence against women?
That's interesting. That's a few questions. Well, when I think of healing, I think about if we're talking about intergenerational violation that's continued to be perpetuated, then we need to find intergenerational solutions, and they don't belong in a court system, and they don't come from somebody else, but the people of the whakapapa line that they come from. I'm talking about So I'll give an example. So when we run wānanga, we invite whānau to have a conversation first, then we set up the wānanga. Because the wānanga is set up about and on what they want to look at in terms of healing strategies, and their mana and their voice is premised before ours. All we do is get the venue together like the marae, and bring all of our people together. From there, they create their own solutions from creating those safe environments within the marae. Because I don't know if that answers the question, but because there was 3 questions in that one question. Can you ask me another question maybe?
Well, I think also what you're saying and what we've heard from all of the panellists is that we can't silo off these different things. You can't become safe and then you become healed and then you become a superhuman person who will no longer experience harm or trauma ever again, that all of these things interweave with each other. And, you know, in the way in which you describe your work, it's so whānau-centred, it's people-centred, it's work in true collaboration right on the ground in their real day-to-day lives. And through that, we are constantly interweaving safety, healing, response, opportunity for change, at every opportunity.
So what keeps us safe on the marae is the kawa of the marae. But also, when we run wānanga in our rōpū, we create a kawa o te whānau. So when they come together, we create that kawa together. It's not something that's imposed on them. It's something that they've been participating in, and it's something that we are challenged to uphold at times. So if things go a bit pear-shaped in the wānanga, then we come back to the kawa and we discuss what it is that's going pear-shaped, where this is going, and do we need to do something about it? And if so, what is that? It seems so simple to me because it's something we do every day, but it might seem a bit too simple to others, but it actually can be difficult to uphold at times too.
Kia ora, thank
Kia
you,
ora.
Kim. And Tony, we've got a question here on Slido for you, and you've talked a bit about accessibility, but specifically, what actions do male survivors Aotearoa take or are hoping to take to ensure that their services are accessible for disabled men?
That's a really good question. That's on, like many of the things that we're working on, it's on the to-do list, I have to say. 3 years in this mahi, and we've taken on a huge amount of work in the whole policy and service development area. We don't have a particular access for disabled people. It is a significant gap in what we do. I learned about this on the sexual violence working group I was on, working with a disabled person who challenged me on it. And all I can do is say, it's on our list of things that we need to attend to. We just haven't got to it yet.
So my comment was, as a disabled person, I don't like hearing this coming out as, oh, we're leaving it. Because if you get it right for disabled people, particularly tangata whakaha Māori, you're going to find access a lot easier for everybody. 25% of your country has an impairment, and we're always left till last in these conversations. Yep. So I'd be interested to hear disability strategy actually talked about in these hui. Kia ora.
Thank you, Ants. And you know, this isn't just a question for Tony. I'm really mindful of that. This is something the entire sector is grappling with. How do we interweave, integrate, and ensure that our responses to disabled people, those most marginalised, vulnerable, and not getting the right response? How are we doing this? Like, I cannot understate, you know, Marama talked about the anxiety and discomfort, and I know that all leaders of agencies in the sector, these are the problems that keep us up at night. And honestly, we as we all know, and as you know, we don't have the answers. That is ever apparent, and that we need to be funded and resourced to work with your community so that we are providing the right collaborative responses to ensure that those people are no longer falling through the gaps. So I know that I probably talk for all of us, Antonio. Thank you for your generosity. I'll talk on behalf of you as well. But this is clear, and it's become clearer and clearer to us. And honestly, because of your generosity, because of your strong advocacy, And I know that it is exhausting. So we too, mainstream services who are not accessible, who are not catering and don't know how to start, to be quite frank, we would love to work in partnership, and we are going to require the government to support us all to come to the table to make sure that we have meaningful, safe responses to all of Aotearoa. So thank you for your continued advocacy. It's in the last budget.
Yeah.
Give us the space, give us the resources, let us work together, let us share our expertise, let us no longer continue to underserve and not even see these people who are experiencing this harm.
I just want to acknowledge the fact that we did get some funding to particularly work with our safeguarding adults from abuse in the budget. So we are getting there, but please start with disabled people right at the start. And there's some organisations that we'll probably touch on later on that can help you do that.
Kia ora, thank you. We've got 5 minutes left. The time has flown. There's a little bit in the middle that we were going to discuss around the challenges. But I think that we've actually interwoven so many of those in terms of just describing our process, our progress and where we've come to so far. But I think that we will have one final kōrero with our panellists around kind of the future aspirations and hopes that you might have for the communities, populations, families, whānau that you serve. Maggie, would you like to talk to us about that?
Aspirations. I guess the three wonderful women who set up our organisation thought that they'd have the job done in a year or two. Wow, hallelujah for that. I live for that day. Maybe one day we won't be needed, and that's fantastic. I'd love to see us out of a job. Kia ora.
Tony, can you share with us some of the future aspirations for male survivors?
Well, our aspiration, of course, is to have a network that works across the country for everybody. And that means it has to be a collaborative network that needs to exist in every location. We don't assume or pretend that we can provide for the needs of every community in every way. We need to work with other people to do this. But I have to say, I need to come back to the challenges. We've opened the floodgates. We've increased the engagement with our people over 300% in 3 short years. We need to be able to sustain that, and it's already struggling under the pressure of a frozen funding for the crisis sector, which is in fact represents a deflation of 20% in the funding that we've actually got. So my aspiration is to keep the network alive and grow it and increase its response. Yeah.
And Kim.
Kia ora. My aspiration is that we listen to people's voice and people's choice. Just like when they come onto the marae, you don't dissect them up into different categories. You welcome them, the whole lot. Irrespective of the labels that people ascribe, we welcome our people one and all. We listen to their voice. We get out of the way and remember that they are the experts, and that it is our obligation and responsibility to support them with the resource, to be a kaitiaki, a guardian from time to time, but also to right out of the way sometimes and get them to put their in way because it's not our job. And so and Indigenous practitioners will be acknowledged throughout this country in their own right by their own people, no matter what they derive from or no matter what culture they derive from. So, mauri ora kia tātou. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Kim. And I think that wraps up our healing panel today. I want to thank our panellists for their contributions. I know that there are a heap of questions still sitting on the screen in front of me. I am sure that through the magic of government, there might be some opportunity for our panellists to respond to these questions there. They're all equally important. And I also want to acknowledge that behind every panellist sitting on the stage is a generous and with grace survivor or person impacted who has shared that experience and enabled us to learn from that, which has enabled the creation of the strategy, which will hopefully one day enable the healing and the way that people need it for all of us that are harmed and impacted by sexualised violence or indeed family violence. So thank you again for this opportunity. Thank you for sharing your learnings with us. Thank you for all listening respectfully to these stories and sharing your questions. And now we will be hearing from our two chief executives who sit on the board of Te Puna Onui, Megan Main from ACC and Jeff Short from Te Puna Kōkiri, to hear their reflections on what they've heard this morning. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. What a start to the day. I'm not sure about the magic of government, but I'm in awe of the magic of you and the magic of our panellists. And Jeff and I have got, I think, 2 minutes to sum up an incredible hour, which is clearly impossible. And so I don't think we'll even try to capture the messages and the passion that we just heard. Thank you, Maggy. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Tony, for sharing with us. What I heard was healing has to be at the heart of the strategy. I heard that we need a stable, sustainable system to support survivors, that there's no quick fix, that we need the workforce coming through. We need to be able to develop and support this workforce that supports the people. I heard so much about it being the people, their experiences, the voices that we have to listen to. I also heard that healing isn't just talk therapy, which you all know. It's the garden outside, it's the playground, it's the peer support, understanding you can look and see someone who is like you but made it through the other side, walking alongside and giving hope. And I also heard that healing is, as we've called out in the strategy, is woven through with the responding, with the strengthening, with that prevention focus, which I know we're all very committed to as well, and I'm really looking forward to the strengthening session coming up. I also want to acknowledge that many of you, including Maggy, are supporting ACC in the reimagining of the service and support that many of you provide to victims. And I also heard those future aspirations that hopefully we don't need to have this sort of conference again in the future because we have eliminated sexual violence in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou. And just to add to what Megan said, a couple of things I heard that really resonated. The first was collaboration. The level and nature of collaboration now across the system sounded to me a lot more strong than I've probably heard for a number of years now. And that seemed to me to be a real positive. And the other part to that I think really reflected and resonated for me is the importance of the lead out of Indigenous knowledge as part of that connection that we need to make with people as part of a healing practice and system that's based in Aotearoa, not imported from somewhere else, that we need to really grow and strengthen what's developing, what's strong in that sector, and connect it to what others are doing. So those were two really big, strong takeaways for me, some things that I'll need to go away and do some stuff around. So thank you. And I really wanted to acknowledge Kyla for, I thought, facilitating and reading them together really well. Thank you. That was a lot to learn from.